Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching the Haitian Revolution Part 6, Roots of Liberty by Extra History. So last time we saw as Toussaint Louverture essentially managed to rise above the infighting in Saint-Domingue and become the colony's main leader. We ended as Napoleon essentially threatened to reimpose slavery, and Toussaint established a strong autonomy, though still keeping an official connection to France. Now, this is the last episode in Extra History series on the Haitian Revolution, though at the end of each of these series, they do an extra episode on sort of the sources they used and any mistakes they made in these videos called their Lies episode. Now, I record a reaction to those, but I keep them members only. And so if you would like to see that video, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description and at the top of the comments down below. You can become a YouTube channel member to see that. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
January 1802, Le Cap. 20,000 French soldiers arrive off the coast of Saint-Domingue. For months, Toussaint Louverture has sent letters to Napoleon telling him that the only way for Saint-Domingue to stay a part of France is home rule, a system where slavery can never return. Toussaint has not broken the colony from France, he argues. He has saved it. Napoleon feels differently.
Yeah, and I basically agree with Toussaint. Now, look, it's obvious that Toussaint had seized an incredible amount of power for himself, and that, he was making Saint-Domingue very autonomous, sort of teetering on independence, but I think he's right that the only way France was going to be able to maintain control of the colony was by working with and through Toussaint. Right? There was just no way the French were going to send in troops to reimpose slavery. It wasn't going to happen. There had been years and years of fighting. People had been free for years. Do you really think they were going to go back to being enslaved? I really don't think so. The amount of resources it would have taken the French, we'll see. It already takes them a lot of manpower and a lot of resources to fail to reimpose slavery. The amount of resources it would have taken to successfully reimpose slavery, I think, would have been immense and would have taken away a lot of manpower from the other issues Napoleon had going on back in Europe, right? So I just don't think it was going to happen. I think the only way Saint-Domingue remains as a French colony is if Napoleon decides to work with Toussaint and agrees not to reimpose slavery. But that's not what Napoleon does. In what I think is a pretty black mark in his career, he decides to take these people who have freed themselves, who had been working with the French Republic, he decides to take them, attempt to re-enslave them, and send this violent mission to go and do that, right? He invades Saint-Domingue.
He has sent this force under the command of his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, with orders to subjugate the island and arrest Toussaint, because he fundamentally believes Toussaint's government should not exist.
Yep.
My decision to destroy the authority.
And there are actually comments from people at that time who say, I think that if Toussaint and Napoleon could have met and talked it out, they might have been able to come to an agreement. A lot of people say that Toussaint and Napoleon were actually pretty similar figures, right? These guys who had risen up from little. Of course, Toussaint starts at a much lower position than Napoleon does. Toussaint is literally born a slave. But these two guys that had worked their way up and become these eminently powerful, the number one authority figure in each of their countries, who had really made their own way, who were these great generals, these great political leaders. Some people think that, they had more alike than they had different. And like I said, there's some comments at that time that maybe if they could have just met up, this could have been avoided. But Napoleon just doesn't see it that way.
Of the blacks in Saint-Domingue, Napoleon said, is not so much based on consideration of commerce and money, as on the need to block forever the march of blacks in the world. And in that endeavor, he will fail.
Yeah, badly. But he'll do damage along the way.
Toussaint Louverture's Constitution of 1801 was a landmark in world history.
Yep, and we talked a lot about that Constitution at the end of last episode, so if you're interested, you should, Go and watch that again if you haven't already.
Not only did it state that slavery would never be allowed in Saint-Domingue, it made Haiti the first nation in the world whose constitution forbade discrimination on the basis of race and skin color.
Yeah, explicitly, right? Because you have this idea of all men being born equal. In the United States, we saw that that was a lie. In France, it had been this debate, right? We saw this in previous episodes. Did they really mean all men, or did they mean some men? They eventually decided, all right, we'll have racial equality. And of course, Sontenax and Paul Varel decided to officially have emancipation of the slaves. Now, of course, Napoleon has decided to bring slavery back, so there's a complicated relationship with this idea of all men being born equal. Haiti, Toussaint, in his constitution, he explicitly says, he lays out racial equality, right? People have the same rights. I believe he says all employment is open to everyone, regardless of race, right? So he explicitly lays out that racial equality. He doesn't leave it open to interpretation.
It's an incredible document, and many nations will spend a century and a half catching up to those same ideals. But it also effectively gave the colony home rule. And not only did this, let's just say, upset France, it also made
Though remember, you might be thinking, like, yeah, I mean, Toussaint's constitution does do that. It also establishes himself as governor for life and establishes home rule for Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, which obviously Napoleon doesn't want. This is true, but if we remember, the reason that Toussaint does this is because Napoleon announces, hey, Saint-Domingue's going to have special rules, which is essentially a blaring alarm that Napoleon will try and reinstate slavery. Toussaint sort of sees the walls closing in, and in response tries to reassert his authority, right? If Napoleon had been more willing to work with him from the beginning, then Toussaint may not have even had this opportunity in the first place. I mean, he was already incredibly powerful, and Napoleon would have had to work with him on his terms, on Toussaint's terms, but this sort of starts because Napoleon gives that signal that he'll reinstate slavery. And then, Toussaint responds, and Napoleon's response to that is to send Charles Leclerc to invade and to reinstate slavery.
Toussaint's allies reconsider supporting him. The British were briefly at peace with France and no longer wanted to rock the boat. And the new president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, was a staunchly pro-French slave owner.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson, I mean, you should hear his writings on Haiti. He's just a representative of this white slave owner who was extremely fearful of what was happening in Haiti and detested this slave uprising. He wanted nothing to do with them. And like they said, you have the Treaty of Amiens between France and Britain. Napoleon, he's got a bit of breathing space. He decides to use that breathing space to reimpose slavery.
He was not going to support a government formed via slave revolt. In fact, both nations were so concerned that the revolution might spread to their own slave systems that they began turning away refugees that might even carry news of it.
Yeah.
There was an idea developing that this troublesome island that had proven slave insurrection could not only win, but then fight off incursions by multiple European armies would set a bad precedent if it succeeded.
Yeah.
Besides, the country's sugar infrastructure had been so damaged by the years of fighting that the main economic argument that independence was good for foreign trade no longer held water. 15% of Saint-Domingue's workforce had left the plantations to join rebel or foreign armies. Factory workers in cities had been repeatedly damaged. And then Leclerc arrived. Originally, his orders were to negotiate a peaceful solution, but that went out the window when one of his commanders attacked a fort due to a miscommunication.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's sort of the orders, and then what his goal really is, which is, as far as we're concerned, he's sent to sort of peacefully negotiate a solution, but his real under-the-table orders, the actual directive he's been given by Napoleon, is to go, reassert control over the colony, and reimpose slavery, right? That is his goal.
Now it was war. Toussaint's defensive plan was to withdraw into the mountainous interior for a guerrilla war, torching the cities so the French had no base of operations. Experience taught him that these new arrivals would suffer badly from disease, and that would be his advantage. But 2 months before Leclerc arrived, Toussaint was forced to put down a rebellion, led by his adopted nephew, who had never been fully on board with the forced labor program. Soon, Leclerc secured the Santo Domingo side. Had Toussaint been able to marshal a united island, he would have won outright. But the recent civil strife and garbled communications meant that many did not rally to his banner.
Yeah, so this is a moment when Toussaint really needs to unite everybody, just something he's so known for doing, and it doesn't work, right? Due to these uprisings that he's been putting down, especially due to the infighting we saw last time, right? The infighting between these different revolutionary leaders. I mean, Rigaud especially, but a lot of these different leaders. And so when not Napoleon, when Toussaint needs everyone to come together, when he calls them to his aid, they don't come, right? Because these different leaders, though they may agree with Toussaint that they do not want slavery reimposed, well, some of them agree, not all actually, but they do want to maintain their positions of authority. Well, they see this as an opportunity to sort of take some power from Toussaint. They know he's gotten too big for his boots. France is coming to put him in his place. And a lot of these revolutionary leaders go, all right, do it. I'm going to hang back and I'll jump in and take some power when the time comes, right? And so they do not come to help Toussaint. They do not unite around him.
Even so, initial battles stunned both sides with their ferocity. Toussaint decided against raising the cities, but one of his commanders did put Le Cap to the torch before withdrawing. Both sides were in bad shape. Yellow fever swept through the French ranks, and the guerrilla campaign caused heavy casualties. So 5 months into the war, when Leclerc offered peace, in exchange for Toussaint retiring to his plantation with full honors, Toussaint decided that it was his best option. He could not continue. It was there the French troops arrested him. Instead of treating him like an officer of rank, they bundled him along like a prisoner, musket at his back.
Yeah, so they trick and trap Toussaint, right? Leclerc offers an olive branch, says, you know what, let's negotiate peace. Toussaint, in a decision that has been deemed foolhardy by many, sort of takes this at face value. He goes and he's captured and arrested. And this is really the point of no return for Saint-Domingue as a colony rather than an independent country. I've been saying this, throughout a couple of episodes, and I truly believe it. The only way this was going to work, the only way Saint-Domingue was going to be maintained as a colony of France and not as an independent country is if one, Napoleon did not try to reinstate slavery, and two, he agreed to work with Toussaint. Toussaint was really a one-of-a-kind kind of guy. You know what I mean? He was the only person, I think, who could have maintained that relationship. Now, Saint-Domingue under Toussaint was incredibly autonomous, close to independence, but I think he was the only guy who could have maintained that delicate balance. They've arrested him, they'll pack him off back to France. With him out of the picture, it's not going to work, right? It's either France violently retakes the colony, reimposes slavery, which is just not going to happen. They don't have the resources, or it's going to be full independence for Haiti and a lot more bloodshed.
Putting him on a ship and deporting him to France. In overthrowing me, you have cut down in Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the Tree of Liberty, Toussaint warned during the arrest. It will spring up again from the roots, for they are numerous and they are deep. He would die less than a year later.
Very famous, the roots of liberty, as the title says, and that's exactly right. And as you can see, Toussaint is packed off to some sort of cold fortress back in France, where he is very sick, doesn't live very well, and dies pretty shortly afterwards.
Malnourished and ill in a mountain castle. But his words proved prophetic. Leclerc had taken nominal control, having brought with him André Rigaud and other exiles that had fled Toussaint, and had mostly convinced the population that France did not intend to bring back slavery. But then, France brought back slavery in nearby Guadeloupe, and residents of Saint-Domingue knew it was only a matter of...
Because, as we talked about during the Revolution, there was this whole debate over, should we have racial equality? Should we get rid of slavery? Are all men created equal? That sort of thing. And there's, goes back and forth, but eventually they land on, yes, we'll have racial equality, and yes, we will abolish slavery. So, France had more colonies than just Haiti. Got Guadeloupe and Martinique, and Napoleon, as we talked about last time, he sends this signal. Now, like I said last time, I thought they were being a bit too cut and dry, right? That was not Napoleon when he talks about these special laws. It wasn't him literally directly saying, we're bringing back slavery, but it was a sign that that's what he intended. Then he sends this invasion force, which is another pretty clear sign he wants to reinstate slavery, and then sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back is that France reinstates slavery in its other colonies. And so now Saint-Domingue is like, okay, we were pretty sure Napoleon wanted to reinstate slavery. Now we're definitely sure.
Of time before it happened to them. This was the universal call to arms Toussaint could not raise. No one wanted slavery back. Local officers that had supported Leclerc defected, and one group massacred several hundred Polish troops who were part of the French expedition. So, Leclerc
I will point out that the French bring Poles with them. There's some Germans there as well. But actually, a fair number of those Germans and those Poles in particular, as the fighting begins to play out, decide that they don't want to side with the French because they've determined that they do not want to fight on behalf of slavery. And a lot of those Poles actually side with the Haitians, which, in the long run, will essentially win them exemption from these massacres of white people that are going to happen under Dessalines, right? So a lot of those Poles sort of manage to sort of break off, and they say, oh, we'd rather fight with the Haitians. So it's an interesting little tidbit.
decided on a new tactic: utter brutality. He wrote to Napoleon, saying that he would exterminate the rebels in the mountain areas, sparing only children under age 12. He would execute all black military officers. French soldiers shot and bayoneted prisoners by the hundreds. He executed 1,000 people by tying weights around their necks and throwing them off ships. And Jacques Dessalines, now in nominal control of local forces, responded in kind.
Yeah, I've talked about this escalation of violence the whole time, right? The violence doesn't come from nowhere, right? I mean, the initial violence of the Haitian Revolution are enslaved people rising up against the violence they've been facing their entire lives. At this point, the French go for this harsh, violent repression, these massacres and killings that are pretty indiscriminate, not very targeted. And so, how do the Haitians respond, especially under Dessalines, who is sort of taking that leadership role after Toussaint has been packed off and died in prison? Well, Dessalines responds in kind. He responds with killings and massacres, and the violence becomes more and more discriminate as it escalates further and further.
The violence of the conflict only escalated further when Leclerc himself died of yellow fever, leaving in charge an even more brutal subordinate who imported man-eating dogs to deal with the rebels.
Yeah, Rochambeau was a real piece of shit. I mean, you want to talk about some of the worst examples of human cruelty and torture you could imagine? Go read into Rochambeau. I won't describe it here. But the sort of killing methods and the torture he imposes on captives, it's horrifying.
But this only galvanized the black and colored armies to finally form a united force. A year later, a year where Dessalines handed the French defeat after defeat, both sides gathered for what would be a decisive battle. The French held a hill fort, and General Francois Capua, a man who had risen up the ranks to become a general and was known as Capua the Death, sounded the charge. French cannons tore into their ranks. Capua and his soldiers clambered over the casualties, regrouping when broken, reforming and pushing on. On the fourth assault, Capua tumbled to earth, his horse mutilated by a cannonball. He rose, and a bullet snatched away his hat. Then he drew his sword and ran in front of his men, yelling, "Forward! Forward!" The display was so incredible, the French stopped firing and applauded his bravery. A French officer rode forward to carry the general's compliments. After this weird little aside, then the fighting resumed. Rebel generals serving in the front line were wounded. Shots tore away pieces of their uniforms. Still, they attacked. Then, the revolution ended as it began, with a storm.
I will say, you can tell how complex this revolution was, this series was, because we don't actually have a lot of these types of anecdotes in this series. They often do, sometimes the series are essentially entirely anecdotes and stories. We've had, I'd say, a little less of that because the series has been so sort of analytical and had to summarize so much, right? This is such a complex series of events that it only leaves you so much room to go over these individual stories. There's just been a lot to cover.
Lightning rent the air, and water poured down. The French withdrew, their position untenable. They sent a peace envoy the next day to negotiate their withdrawal from the island. Of the 80,000 French troops sent to Saint-Domingue, only 30,000 would return.
Look at that. And this is what I mean when I say the French did not have the resources, because some of you might have heard that and thought, what do you mean? We're talking about the French Empire. Under Napoleon, they've got an incredible amount of manpower, resources. Just look at those numbers. Do you think Napoleon has the manpower to send over to Saint-Domingue with everything he has happening in Europe? No, he doesn't. He's occupied with for him what are bigger affairs back in Europe. He's losing tens of thousands of men in the colony of Saint Domingue, mostly to yellow fever. He just can't afford to be doing that. It's not worth it for him.
In fact, their withdrawal was part of a general French pullback from the Americas. The vast expenditures of blood and treasure in Saint-Domingue convinced Napoleon to cut his losses and focus on his European wars. To help that pursuit, he sold Louisiana to the United States.
They're exactly right. This is one of the big reasons why Napoleon decides to sell Louisiana to the U.S. One part of that is he needs the money. He's spending so much money, he needs to make some of it back. But a big part of it is Napoleon. Napoleon's an ambitious guy. He does have this idea for this American empire he wants to build, right? France has lost a lot of its colonies to the British, particularly during the 7 Years' War. Napoleon has got a vision. But key to that vision is Saint-Domingue, right? That's key to controlling the Caribbean. It's key to making money in the Americas, right? It's key to his vision for his American empire. And he's wasting so much manpower and money and resources on Saint-Domingue, and when it doesn't work out, he essentially gives up on this vision. He says, I'm focusing on Europe. Let's sell Louisiana, right? So that's a big part of this.
Dessalines was supposed to send the French wounded back to France after Leclerc's withdrawal. He drowned them instead, because Dessalines had learned something from all of those years of indecision around slavery. With its wild reversals over civil rights and abolition, with French citizens like the Big Whites constantly trying to undermine and reverse every freedom won, the French had sent a message over the past decade that the people of Saint-Domingue would never be safe under the rule of white Frenchmen.
Yeah, that is essentially the message that is sent, and it's reinforced by the capture of Toussaint, right? Remember, what was Toussaint's MO? Apart from gaining power for himself, Toussaint's vision of Haiti, of Saint-Domingue, was of this colony where everyone lived side by side, right? There was racial equality. The whites, the mixed, and the black people all lived alongside each other. That was his vision. And what happened to Toussaint? He was captured and essentially killed by the French, right? Locked up until he died. What message do you think that sends to the people of Haiti? What message does that send to Dessalines? It sends the message that this doesn't work, that there's no negotiation with the French, that you can't have a multiracial society. That is the lesson that's taken. That's not what I believe. I think you can have a multiracial society, but that's the lesson that's taken, right? That it's not going to happen. And so they take a different course of action than Toussaint did.
So, after declaring the island to be the independent nation of Haiti, Dessalines ordered all remaining white French should be massacred.
Yeah, and I'll point out a couple of sources here. One being Dessalines' Declaration of Independence, so we can get a sort of a look at what he was thinking, or at least the rhetoric he was putting out at that time. So here we have Dessalines' Declaration of Independence. I'll go over a couple of passages. I will point out, not to sort of flex, but one of my professors at grad school, Julia Gaffield, was actually the one who discovered the Haitian Declaration of Independence about 15 years ago. She was the one who uncovered it in the archives, which was a pretty big moment in the sort of historiography of Haiti. So, there's my sort of connection to all of this. Anyway, I'll point out a couple of passages here just to get an insight to what Dessalines is saying. So, here we have, we must, with one last act of national authority, forever assure the empire of liberty in the country of our birth. We must take any hope of re-enslaving us away from the inhuman government that so long kept us in the most humiliating torpor. In the end, we must live independent or die. Independence or death. Let these sacred words unite us and be the signal of battle and of our reunion. So, you see here, it's essentially, he's saying, we will never again be re-enslaved. It's independence or death, right? We see similar rhetoric in the United States, but here it's more true than ever, right? Because they're facing re-enslavement from the French. And so Dessalines is saying, I'm taking this action. I'm declaring independence because we can never be sure of our freedom under the French Empire. We must declare our independence to forever assure our freedom. On that note of sort of connection to the French and the remaining white people, aka French people mostly on the island, here we have, the French name still haunts our land. Everything revives the memories of the cruelties of this barbarous people. Our laws, our habits, our towns, everything still carries the stamp of the French, right? So that idea that you must fully separate yourself from the French, right? Full independence. Indeed, there are still French in our island, and you believe yourself to be free and independent of that republic, which it is true has fought all the nations, but which has never defeated those who wanted to be free. What, victims of our own credulity and indulgence for 14 years, defeated not by French armies, but by the pathetic eloquence of their agents' proclamations? When will we tire of breathing the air that they breathe? So he's saying, you believe yourself free? We still have French people on our island. We will never be free while they're here. And are we threatened by their armies? No. We're threatened by their agents, by their lies. Right? He's saying we need a full break, and we need to get rid of any French people that are still here in our land. Right? So you can sort of see what he's beginning to justify here. And to be clear, this sort of massacre was not necessarily unanimously popular. We might talk a little bit more about that in the video, but you can sort of see the thought here, right? How he comes to this conclusion. Now, we've got an interesting section near the end here, because remember, this Declaration of Independence, who are the audiences for this? Of course, the people of Saint-Domingue, the French, obviously, but also the other countries of the world, right? Dessalines wants to communicate with those countries that own territory or colonies around Haiti. So here's what he says. Let us ensure, however, that a missionary spirit does not destroy our work. Let us allow our neighbors to breathe in peace. May they live quietly under the laws that they have made for themselves, and let us not, as revolutionary firebrands, declare ourselves the lawgivers of the Caribbean, nor let our glory consist in troubling the peace of the neighboring islands. Unlike that which we inhabit, theirs has not been drenched in the innocent blood of its inhabitants. They have no vengeance to claim from the authority that protects them. So remember, one of the big fears during and after the Haitian Revolution of these other slave powers is that the Haitian Revolution will inspire other slave revolts and revolutions, right? The Americans, the British, the Spanish, they're all extremely fearful that this is going to lead to revolutions in their colonies. And so what is Dessalines saying here? He's saying, now, of course, we have our ideals, but let us keep to ourselves, right? Let us not get carried away and try to bring our revolution throughout the Caribbean, right? I mean, remember, this is the era of the French Revolution, where these European powers were so frightened that the French Revolution would spread to their countries, and so they tried to put the French Republic down. Dessalines is saying, you don't have to worry about us. We are not going to spread revolution to your colonies, okay? That's what he's trying to convince them. Now, they're not very convinced, right? These European powers and the United States, obviously, are still very fearful of Haiti, and they still despise an independent Haiti and will punish it in any way they can. And this is sort of a continuing issue that different Haitian leaders have to handle, which is, how activist do they want to be? Do they want to keep to themselves and truly not advocate for the enslaved people of the Americas? Or do they want to step out and try to help people, even if they risk causing backlash from these European slave powers and the US, sort of including them in that group, right? So this is a big question. But in this moment, Dessalines, because of course Haiti's under such threat from France, saying, hey, don't have to worry about us. We're just keeping to ourselves. Our issues with France, not the rest of y'all. And before I move on, I'll end with this section right here where Dessalines talks about himself a little bit. And you, a people so long without good fortune, witness to the oath we take. Remember that I counted on your constancy and courage when I threw myself into the career of liberty to fight the despotism and tyranny you had struggled against for 14 years. Remember that I sacrificed everything to rally to your defense, family, children, fortune, and now I am rich only with your liberty. My name has become a horror to all those who want slavery. Despots and tyrants curse the day I was born. If ever you refused or grumbled while receiving those laws that the spirit guarding your fates dictates me to do for your own good, you would deserve the fate of an ungrateful people. But I reject that awful idea. You will sustain the liberty that you cherish and support the leader who commands you. Therefore, vow before me to live free and independent, and to prefer death to anything that will try to place you back in chains. Swear, finally, to pursue forever the traitors and enemies of your independence. So we see here that Dessalines is also saying, hey, stay loyal to me, all right? Remember what I've done for you, okay? Don't forget me, all right? I'm the one declaring your independence. I'm the one who's won this from the French, right? So he's also trying to cement his own position here. I also like the part where he says, my name has become a horror to all those who want slavery, right? So Dessalines is still a pretty feared individual even to this day, right? Due to that high degree of violence that he employed. You've sort of talked about already the differences between him and Toussaint. And you can see he's aware of that reputation. He knows that, as he says, despots and tyrants curse the day I was born, right? He was a greatly maligned figure by the sort of white presses of the world. They were deeply fearful of him and they despised him. He's clearly aware of that reputation, and he's sort of, using that to say, hey, I have given up everything for you. I have fought for your independence. Don't turn against me now. Because remember, the Haitian Revolution has been rife with infighting. So that's something Dessalines is worried about even in this moment. So that's just a couple of passages from the Haitian Declaration of Independence here. Now we can get back to that video.
Independent nation of Haiti. Dessalines ordered all remaining white French should be massacred, even the women and children. The people were reluctant, and often only complied when Dessalines showed up with an army to enforce the edict. Some French escaped, pretending to be Americans or British, who were not subject to the decree. But the message Dessalines intended to send backfired. It further isolated Haiti, with the United States refusing to recognize its government or trade with it for 60 years.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't have done so anyway. I mean, to be honest. I mean, yes, this is an action which causes a lot of outrage internationally. However, even if Dessalines had not ordered these massacres, Haiti would not have been accepted by these other white powers. It just wasn't going to happen. That much was already clear. And as they pointed out, it was not necessarily this blanket order. Like some white people were like, no, I'm British or I'm American. It was specifically targeted against these French. And as I said, there were particularly these Germans and Poles who had fought on the side of the Haitians, who Dessalines makes a particular exception for. And he actually points them out in his constitution. I'll show you just a brief segment here, just very shortly. So this is the 1805 Constitution of Haiti, right, instituted by Dessalines, very much based on Toussaint's 1801 Constitution. I won't go through the entire thing, but something I just wanted to point out is a couple of articles here on the sort of white population of Haiti, now independent Haiti. So he says in Article 12, no white man of whatever nation he may be shall put his foot on this territory with the title of master or proprietor, neither shall he in future acquire any property therein. Right? So he's saying, white people can't come here and own property. However, even though he says no white man of any nation, in the next article he then lays out a couple of exceptions. So he says, the preceding article cannot in the smallest degree affect white women who have been naturalized Haitians by the government, nor does it extend to children already born, or that may be born of said women. The Germans and Polanders, the Poles, naturalized by the government, are also comprised in the dispositions of the present article. So he's saying the exceptions to this are those white women, kids, also these Germans and Poles, and it was particularly Poles who had served alongside the Haitians fighting back against the French. This creates sort of an interesting situation where you have these white people who have been naturalized as citizens of Haiti, right? That's what they are. And then in the next article it says, all exception of color among the children of one and the same family, of whom the chief magistrate is the father, being necessarily deceased, the Haitians shall henceforward be known only by the generic appellation of blacks. So what he's saying here is that all Haitians are members of one big family, of which the magistrate, the chief magistrate, myself, Dessalines is the father, so putting himself in there, he's saying all Haitians are now black, right? And the reason he does this is because there are still some of these distinctions between mixed people and non-mixed black people, right? This is still sort of an issue that will persist. In Dessalines, this is his attempt to say, nope, we're all black. Like, ignore all of that. But what that does is that means that these Germans and Poles and these white women are now officially black, right? They are Haitian citizens, right? They're naturalized by the government, and so they are included in this designation, right? So you have this sort of interesting little tidbit here where, all Haitians are black, and there are some white Haitians who are now considered black. So just an interesting little thing. Like I said, I'm not going to go over the entire Constitution. I just thought that was sort of interesting to point out. By the way, I'm going to link any sources I use down below so you can and absolutely should go and check them out, read them for yourselves.
Dessalines' military rule and crowning himself emperor continued to set the new nation on a troubled path. Generals would seize power regularly, ensuring the new nation could never fully recover from the damage of the revolution.
Yeah, Dessalines really establishes a precedent here. Well, I mean, you could sort of say Toussaint did. He declares himself governor for life. He sets up this coerced labor regime. Dessalines kind of picks up where he's left off. Dessalines crowns himself emperor, continues with this forced labor regime. Eventually, Dessalines is overthrown. Haiti splits. You've got two different Haitian governments, and those two guys both rule as dictators and implement forced labor regimes, right? So the precedent has been started, and it sort of continues with the next couple of generations of Haitian leaders.
Slaveholding societies like the United States looked at Haiti as a nightmare scenario, using it to argue incorrectly that wholesale slaughter was the inevitable result of abolition. And
Right, and this is why I really try to provide context with this series, because the example of Haiti has been forever used to say, well, abolition, it's not possible without this tremendous amount of violence, and it shouldn't be done, right? And of course, you don't tend to have people arguing in favor of slavery today, but a lot of these arguments still stick around in different forms. And the point I want to show is that there was incredible violence associated with the Haitian Revolution, but it all exists within a particular context. And as we saw, the violence, it was sort of escalated up to. It didn't start this way. There was violence in the beginning, absolutely, but the sort of most indiscriminate parts, it's due to this escalating violence where, the French invade, things escalate, the violence gets worse and worse and worse. So, it's really important to understand the context here.
It to argue incorrectly that wholesale slaughter was the inevitable result of abolition, and that a black nation could not govern itself. Later, the French returned, forcing the Haitian government into massive indemnity payments it couldn't afford.
Yeah, about 20 years later, the French come back, and they force, by bringing their gunships in, they essentially force Haiti to accept this massive, massive indemnity, right? They want them to pay France this extremely large amount of money, and, what they do is the French impose this indemnity, and then they say, hey, you know what? Why don't we loan you some money to help you pay it off, right? So they're sort of getting them twice, right? And of course, Haiti ends up incredibly indebted to France, right? That's not really a good way to get an independent country off the ground.
Burdening the already broken economy, keeping it in poverty. And due to this political instability, the United States would stage multiple military interventions in the 19th and 20th centuries under the banner of protecting American lives and property, eventually occupying the nation for 19 years.
That's what I was going to say. Particularly in the 20th century, the U.S. occupies Haiti for years. You can see how this all snowballs into the current situation, where France forces this indemnity on Haiti, and then they force them into debt to pay off this indemnity. This sort of cripples their economy, which forces them to take more and more debts, more and more loans over time from the international community, from the United States. And then whenever those debts or the business interests of these great powers are at risk, they'll just invade Haiti, right? The United States, the French are, first the most involved power in Haiti's situation. Then it becomes the U.S., right? The U.S. will occupy Haiti many times. It'll absolutely sort of control what's going on there, the politics. If there's ever any threat to American capital, the U.S. will intervene and, as we saw, sometimes occupy for many years at a time, right? And they'll make sure Haiti is continually dependent on these other great powers, and there's really not much they can do, without being controlled by these great powers around the globe, particularly the U.S.
Others saw a different message, one of inspiration, not fear. When American firebrand John Brown tried to raise a slave revolt in the South before the Civil War, He'd hoped to trigger an uprising like Haiti's.
Mm-hmm.
And the new nation.
And, you know, Haiti absolutely does provide sort of an inspiration to many enslaved people. That's the thing. These white slave owners are worried that Haiti is going to lead to mass slave revolutions. And while, you know, that may not necessarily be the case, Haiti is inspiring to a lot of different people, right? A lot of enslaved people, a lot of free people of color, or really around the world, throughout the Americas in particular. They do see Haiti as sort of this beacon of hope. And there are several instances of slave rebellions where the people involved will cite Haiti as an inspiration.
Would both harbor the revolutionary Simon Bolivar when he was a fugitive and loan him Haitian troops on the
Yeah, so Alexandre Pétion, one of those Haitian leaders, a successor to Dessalines, will have contact with Bolivar, will harbor Bolivar, and will essentially convince Bolivar, hey, in exchange for our support, you know, guns especially, will you agree to implement emancipation wherever you go? Right? So Alexandre Pétion and Haiti play an important role in these Latin American revolutions, right? And Bolivar's role in particular.
The condition that he freed the slaves in Spanish America. To the oppressed and colonized around the world, Haiti would become a symbol, one that showed what was possible when people, despite having nothing but determination and a desire for freedom, declared they would be slaves no more.
Yeah.
Special thanks to our educational tier patrons Ahmed Ziad Turk, Joseph Blaine, and Dominic Valenciano.
All right. And thank you to all my patrons and channel members. On that note, if you would like to see that sort of part 7, the lies episode, where we go over, you know, the sources, extra history used, and anything they got wrong, you can become a channel member. Right? You can do that by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button, and I'll link that episode in the description and at the top of the comments if you'd like to see it. So there you go, the Haitian Revolution. You know, I had a lot to say on this one. Actually, most of my work, say in my master's degree, was on Haiti post-independence. Haiti and the United States is what I did a lot of, but Haiti after what we've been talking about here. So that's sort of where most of my knowledge is. But of course, doing that requires you to have a pretty solid basis in the Haitian Revolution itself. So I still have a lot of thoughts on this series. There's frankly a lot more I could say, but, you know, I've written a lot of that down throughout the years. So anyway, I certainly enjoyed having the opportunity to talk a little bit about Haiti and talk a lot. I certainly did. If you guys enjoyed this one, you could leave a like, subscribe, once again, become a channel member, all that good stuff. And so I hope you guys are all having a great day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.